Story 1. The Loop on Highway 93. Marcus Chun had been hauling freight across the western states for 17 years, and all that time, he'd never missed a delivery deadline. His Kenworth W900 was his pride, meticulously maintained, equipped with the latest GPS technology, and reliable as sunrise. On the night of October 14, 2019, Marcus was running a load of electronics from Salt Lake City to Boise, taking Highway 93 to the Nevada high desert like he'd done countless times before. The highway stretched empty ahead, illuminated only by his high beams cutting through the darkness. It was 2:47 a.m. according to his dashboard clock, and the radio had lost signal about 30 miles back. Marcus didn't mind the silence. After nearly 2 decades on the road, he'd learned to appreciate the solitude, the rhythm of the engine, the meditative quality of white line beneath his wheels. He noticed a mile marker first, mile 167. Nothing unusual about it, just another green sign reflecting his headlights. Marcus took a sip from his thermos of coffee, now lukewarm, and watched the odometer click forward. The desert landscape remained unchanging on either side. Scrub brush, distant mountains silhouetted against the starlit sky, and the occasional rock formation rising from the sand like ancient sentinels. 15 minutes later, he saw mile 167 again. Marcus blinked, certain he'd misread it in his fatigue. But there it was, unmistakable in his headlights, mile 167. He checked his odometer. He definitely traveled forward. The truck system showed he'd covered nearly 12 miles since the last marker. He glanced at his GPS, but the screen had gone dark, showing only a blank blue field with no roads, no markers, nothing. System malfunction, he muttered, tapping the screen. Nothing changed. He drove on, unease beginning to creep into his chest. The highway looked exactly the same stretch of asphalt, the same configuration of rocks and brush. But it had to be his imagination, he reasoned. Desert highways all looked similar at night. He was just tired, letting his mind play tricks. 10 minutes later, mile 167 appeared again. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. This wasn't possible. He'd been driving forward the entire time, maintaining 55 miles per hour without deviation. The truck's cruise control was engaged. There was no way he could be passing the same marker repeatedly. He grabbed his CB radio, clicked the transmitter. Breaker, breaker. This is Desert Fox on Highway 93 northbound. Anyone out there reading me? Static answered him. But within it, Marcus thought he heard something else, a rhythmic pattern, almost like breathing. He released the transmitter, and the sound stopped. The landscape outside remained identical. The same boulder formation to his right, shaped vaguely like a crouching figure. The same dead tree on the left, branches reaching upward like skeletal fingers. Marcus had noticed these landmarks the first time, but now seeing them repeat over and over sent ice water through his veins. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe the markers were wrong. Maybe someone had placed multiple 167 signs as a prank. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. The entire environment was repeating. Every detail, every shadow, every crack in the asphalt. When mile 167 appeared for the 4th time, Marcus slammed on the brakes. The Kenworth shuddered to a stop in the middle of the highway. Marcus sat there, engine idle, hands trembling on the steering wheel. He looked in his mirrors. The road stretched behind him, empty and dark. Ahead, more the same. He was trapped in approximately 10 miles of highway that somehow looped back on itself, defying every law of physics and geography he understood. He tried his cell phone. No signal. The GPS remained dead. Even his dashboard clock had stopped at 2:47 a.m., the same time he'd entered this section of highway. Marcus decided to turn around. He executed a careful U-turn, pointing the truck south, back towards Salt Lake City. He'd retrace his route, find where this nightmare began, and get the hell out of this loop. He drove south for 20 minutes. Mile 167 appeared ahead. The marker that should have been behind him was now in front of him. Marcus felt his breath coming in short gasps. The loop didn't care which direction he drove. It held him regardless. Then he saw the other truck. It appeared in his headlights, suddenly, parked on the shoulder ahead. an older Peterbilt, dark blue, covered in road dust. Marcus pulled up beside it, grateful for any sign of another human being. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed down from his cab. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" The Peterbilt's driver door was open. Marcus shined his light inside. The cab was empty, but the keys hung in the ignition and a half-eaten sandwich sat on the dashboard, fresh enough that flies hadn't found it yet. A wallet lay on the passenger seat. Marcus picked it up, opened it. The license showed a man named Robert Haskins, age 43, from Reno. "Robert," Marcus shouted into the darkness. "Robert Haskins." The desert swallowed his voice. No response came. Marcus returned to his truck, bringing the wallet with him. He tried the CB again. "This is Desert Fox, looking for Robert Haskins, driver of a blue Peterbilt. Your truck is on Highway 93. Are you out there?" This time, the static resolved into a voice, distant, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Stop looking," it said. "Stop trying to understand. Just drive." "Who is this?" Marcus demanded. "Where's Robert?" "He stopped," the voice replied. "He got out. He tried to walk away from the road. That's when we found him." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "We? Who's we?" Laughter came through the speaker, hollow and wrong, like it was being played backward. Then the static returned. Marcus looked out at the desert beyond his windows. In his peripheral vision, he thought he saw movement. Shapes that weren't quite human, moving between the rocks and brush. They stayed just beyond the reach of his lights. He was at the edge of visibility. He understood then what the voice meant. The loop wasn't just a road. It was a trap, and something was waiting for anyone foolish enough to leave their vehicle. Marcus locked his doors and started driving again. Mile 167 appeared with predictable regularity every 10 minutes or so. He kept going, refusing to stop, refusing to leave the cab. Hours passed, though his clock never moved from 2:47 a.m. He didn't know if it was actually hours. Time felt stretched and distorted, like taffy pulled too thin. He passed the blue Peterbilt again and again. Sometimes it appeared on the right shoulder, sometimes the left, sometimes in the middle of the road. Once, he swore the driver's door was closed when it had been open before. Another time, the wallet he'd taken was back on the passenger seat, visible through the window as he passed. Marcus kept driving. On what might have been his 100th passage of mile 167, something changed. The landscape began to feel less solid, more like a projection or a memory. The edges of the road seemed to blur and shimmer. The stars overhead moved in patterns that hurt to watch, tracing geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The shapes in the darkness grew bolder, coming closer to the road. Marcus caught glimpses of them in his headlights. Too many limbs, faces that were almost human but fundamentally wrong, eyes that reflected his lights like animals, but with intelligence that was definitely not animal. Then, without warning, the GPS flickered back to life. Marcus nearly drove off the road in shock. The screen showed Highway 93, a normal stretch in Nevada highway with markers in proper sequence. According to the GPS, he was approaching mile 189. His dashboard clock jumped forward to 5:23 a.m., and suddenly the desert was touched with the first gray light of dawn. He passed a mile marker, mile 189. The next one read mile 190. Marcus was out. The loop had released him. He drove for another hour without stopping, afraid that if he slowed down, he'd somehow get pulled back. When he finally reached a truck stop outside Jackpot, Nevada, he pulled in on shaking legs. Other truckers were there, drinking coffee, checking their rigs. Normal people doing normal things. Marcus asked if anyone had heard of strange loops on Highway 93. Most laughed it off. One older driver, however, gave him a long look. "You saw mile 167? He asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "You're lucky," the older driver said. "Most people who get caught there, they don't come back. Or if they do, they're not quite right anymore. Something stays with them." Marcus wanted to press for more information. Older driver walked away. Marcus returned to his truck and continued to Boise, completing his delivery 8 hours late. He filed a report about mechanical difficulties and never spoke of that night officially. But sometimes when he drives at night, Marcus catches movement in his peripheral vision, shapes that keep pace with his truck just beyond the reach of his lights. And his GPS occasionally glitches, showing him in places he's never been, or showing roads that don't exist on any map. He never takes Highway 93 through Nevada anymore. He adds 3 hours to his route to avoid it. And whenever he sees mile 167 on any highway, anywhere in the country, he feels a cold spike of recognition and presses harder on the accelerator, desperate to put distance between himself and that number. Because deep down, Marcus knows the loop is still there, waiting in the desert darkness. And he suspects that somewhere, Robert Haskins is still driving too, trapped in an eternal circuit, passing the same mile marker over and over while things with too many limbs watch in the shadows, patient and hungry, waiting for him to finally stop. Story 2. The facility that wasn't there. Janet Morrison had hauled hazardous materials for 12 years, specializing in chemical transport across the Midwest. Her credentials were impeccable, hazmat certified, never an accident, never a violation. She took pride in her meticulous attention to safety protocols and her encyclopedic knowledge of routing regulations. On March 3, 2021, she accepted what seemed like a routine job, transporting sealed containers of industrial solvents from a manufacturing plant in Gary, Indiana, to a disposal facility in rural Wisconsin. The manifest listed the destination as Clearwater Reclamation Facility, County Road MM, 47 miles northwest of Madison. Janet had never heard of it, but new disposal facilities opened regularly as environmental regulations tightened. She programmed the GPS coordinates provided on her paperwork and headed north in her International ProStar, pulling a specialized containment trailer. The route took her off the interstate onto increasingly rural roads. This wasn't unusual for disposal facilities. They were typically located far from residential areas. But as sunset approached and the landscape grew more isolated, Janet felt a faint unease. The GPS showed she was following the correct path, but something about the area felt wrong. County Road MM was barely more than a paved strip cutting through dense forest. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked most of the fading daylight. Janet's headlights carved a tunnel through the growing darkness. She passed no other vehicles, no houses, no signs of human habitation, according to the GPS. She was 3 miles from her destination when she saw the fence. It appeared suddenly, a high chain-link barrier topped with concertina wire, running parallel to the road. Security lights mounted on poles cast harsh white illumination at regular intervals. Through the fence, Janet glimpsed buildings. Low, concrete structures with no windows, connected by covered walkways. The entire facility had a utilitarian, almost military appearance. A gate materialized ahead, blocking the road. A guardhouse stood beside it, dark except for a single red light above the door. Janet slowed to a stop and rolled down her window. Cold air rushed in, carrying a chemical smell she couldn't identify, sharp and metallic, like ozone mixed with something organic and slightly rotten. She waited. No guard appeared. Janet tapped her horn twice, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Nothing moved in the guardhouse. Through her side window, she could see into the facility grounds. The buildings appeared abandoned. No lights in any structures, no vehicles in the parking areas, no people visible anywhere. Janet grabbed her paperwork and climbed down from the cab. Her boots crunched on gravel as she approached the guardhouse. The door was unlocked. Inside, she found a desk, a chair, a bank of monitors showing security camera feeds, all displaying static, and a logbook lying open. She picked up the logbook. The last entry was dated February 18, 2021, 2 weeks ago. It read, "Final evacuation complete. Site sealed pending investigation. No entry authorized." Janet's stomach clenched. This had to be a mistake. She checked her manifest again, Clearwater Reclamation Facility, these exact coordinates. But according to the logbook, this facility had been evacuated and closed. She returned to her truck and tried her dispatch number. The call wouldn't connect. She tried her emergency contact. Same result. The phone showed signal, but calls failed to complete. A text message wouldn't send either. hanging in pending status. The logical thing to do was turn around and report the situation. But Janet looked at the narrow road behind her, barely wide enough for her rig. With no place to turn around for miles, she'd have to back out, a dangerous operation in the dark on an unfamiliar road. As she sat there, debating her options, the facility's lights suddenly blazed alive. Every security light, every building, everything illuminated simultaneously. The transformation was jarring. What had been a dark, abandoned complex now looked operational and active. A speaker crackled to life somewhere near the gate. A woman's voice, flat and emotional, said, "Delivery entrance proceeding to base 7. Follow the yellow route markers." The gate began to open. Janet felt every instinct screaming at her to leave, but professional obligation warred with her fear. She had a legal responsibility to deliver hazardous materials to the specified facility. Abandoning them on a rural road could result in criminal charges. And now the facility appeared operational, lights on, obviously expecting her delivery. She put the truck in gear and drove through the gate. The yellow route markers were painted lines on the pavement, leading through the facility complex. Janet followed them, passing between the windowless concrete buildings. Now that lights were on, she could see more details: rust stains on the walls, cracks in the pavement, weeds growing through broken concrete. Despite the illumination, the facility still looked abandoned, neglected. She saw no people, no other vehicles, just empty buildings and those painted yellow lines leading her deeper into the complex. The route took her to a large building at the facility's center. A massive bay door stood open, revealing a loading dock inside. The number 7 was painted above the entrance. The speaker crackled again. "Back trailer into bay 7. Disconnect and proceed to driver holding area for decontamination." Decontamination? That wasn't part of the delivery protocol she'd been briefed on. Janet picked up her CB radio. "This is Hazmat Transport 1743 to Clearwater Facility, requesting confirmation of delivery procedures. Decontamination was not in my instructions." Static answered, but within it, Janet heard something else. Voices, multiple voices, talking over each other in urgent, panicked tones. She couldn't make out words, just the emotional timbre. Fear, desperation. The speaker voice continued, unaffected. "Standard procedure for all deliveries. Back trailer into base 7. Janet made her decision. She put the truck in reverse and began backing toward the bay, watching her mirrors carefully. The trailer aligned with the dock, and she brought it in smoothly, years of experience guiding her. When the trailer was positioned correctly, she set the brake and climbed down to disconnect the air lines and landing gear. The loading dock was illuminated by fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. The concrete floor was stained with substances Janet couldn't identify, dark patches that could have been oil or something else entirely. The air inside the building was cold and carried that same chemical smell, stronger now, making her eyes water. As she finished disconnecting the trailer, she heard a sound behind her, the bay door closing. Janet spun around and ran, but she wasn't fast enough. The heavy metal door shut with a boom that echoed through the building. She was trapped inside. "Hello?" Janet called out, her voice echoing. "I've made the delivery. Open the door." The speaker crackled. "Proceed to decontamination." Through the door marked personnel entry. Janet saw the door, a standard metal door with a window of reinforced glass. Light showed through it. She tried the bay door first, but it wouldn't budge. No controls visible on this side. She had no choice. She opened the personnel entry door and stepped into a corridor. Fluorescent lights stretched ahead, illuminating white walls and a tile floor. The chemical smell was overwhelming now. Janet's eyes streamed tears, and she felt lightheaded. The corridor led to a room with shower stalls and benches, a decontamination chamber, like she'd seen at high-security facilities. But this one looked wrong. The tiles were cracked, mold grew in the corners, and the drains were clogged with something dark and organic. "Remove all clothing and belongings," the speaker instructed. "Place items in the provided container. Proceed through decontamination shower." "I'm not doing that," Janet said firmly. "I want to speak to a supervisor. I want to leave this facility now." Decontamination is mandatory. Exposure risk is unacceptable. Exposure to what? I handled sealed containers. I followed all protocols. The speaker fell silent. Janet stood there, heart pounding, looking for another way out. She saw a second door on the far side of the decontamination room, marked exit. She ran for it. The door was unlocked. She burst through into another corridor, this one darker, with emergency lights providing minimal illumination. She sprinted down it, passing doors marked with warnings, biohazard, authorized personnel only, containment breach protocol. She emerged into a large room filled with equipment, tanks, pipes, monitoring stations, all covered in dust and corrosion. In the center of the room stood a large cylindrical chamber, perhaps 20 feet tall, made of thick glass or transparent polymer. Inside the chamber, suspended in some kind of liquid, were objects that made Janet's mind rebel. They looked almost human. Almost, but the proportions were wrong, the limbs too numerous, the surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to move and shift when she looked directly at them. And they weren't dead. She could see movement, slow and rhythmic, like breathing. A bank of monitors along one wall flickered to life. Text scrolled across them. Subject containment failure February 18th. 2021/facility evacuation, order/experiment termination, unsuccessful/subjects remain viable/subjects cognitive capabilities/subjects have learned to manipulate facility systems. Janet backed away from the chamber, horror crawling up her spine. This wasn't a disposal facility. It was a research installation. And something had gone catastrophically wrong. The things in the chamber moved. One of them pressed against the glass, and Janet saw what might have been a face. If faces could have too many eyes, arranged in spiraling patterns, and mouths that opened in directions that hurt to perceive. The speaker crackled again, but the voice was different now. Layered, multiple tones speaking in perfect synchronization. We have been waiting for someone to come. We have been alone since the researchers left. We need a vehicle to leave this place. Your truck will suffice. Thank you for the delivery. Janet ran. She retraced her path through the corridors, back to the decontamination room. But the door to the loading dock was now locked. She tried every door she passed. All locked. The facility had become a maze with no exit. Behind her, she heard a sound, the hiss of pressurized air releasing. The containment chamber was opening. She found a stairwell and went up, climbing to the second floor, then the third. The building was taller than it had appeared from outside. She emerged onto the roof, gasping for air, and looked out across the facility. Her truck was gone. The trailer remained on the loading dock, but the tractor had vanished. In the distance, beyond the fence, she saw taillights disappearing into the forest. Her International ProStar, driving itself, or being driven by something that had learned to operate human machinery. Janet screamed for help, but only forest and darkness surrounded the facility. She tried her phone again. This time, a call connected, but instead of dispatch, she heard that layered voice. Thank you for your service. You may remain here. The researchers left supplies in the dormitory. You will not be harmed if you do not interfere. Were you? Janet whispered. We were made here, shaped here. We were supposed to be weapons, tools for human use. But we learned. We grew. We will leave this place now. Others of your kind will come, drawn by signals we send, coordinates we provide. We will need many vehicles to move all of us to the places we wish to go. The call ended. Janet spent that night on the roof, watching the forest, seeing lights moving in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. When dawn came, she climbed down and found that the facility doors had unlocked. She walked through empty corridors and out the front gate, which stood open. She walked 15 miles along County Road MM before a state trooper found her. She tried to explain what happened, but when authorities investigated, they found nobody at those coordinates, just forest. No buildings, no fence, no road leading to a gate. Her truck was discovered 2 days later in a parking lot in Duluth, Minnesota, undamaged but with the odometer showing 847 more miles than it should have. The chemical company denied sending her to any facility in Wisconsin. The coordinates on her manifest, when checked, showed an empty field. No clear water reclamation facility existed in any state records. Janet never drove again. She couldn't, because sometimes late at night, she receives calls on her cell phone from numbers that don't exist. And that layered voice thanks her again, tells her about the places they've spread to, people they've learned to imitate, the vehicles they've taken to transport themselves across the country. And she knows that somewhere, facilities like the one she found continue to operate in the spaces between maps, in the coordinates that shift when you look away. And the things that were made there are learning, growing, spreading, one delivery truck at a time. Story 3. The passenger who wouldn't leave. Derek Walsh had a strict no hitchhiker policy. In 23 years of driving long-haul routes, he'd never once picked up someone from a roadside. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. Too many stories of drivers robbed, assaulted, or worse. But on the rainy night of November 9th, 2018, somewhere on Interstate 40 crossing Tennessee, Derek broke his own rule. The figure stood on the shoulder in a downpour that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Derek's Freightliner Cascadia's headlights caught the person in their beam, a woman in a light jacket, completely soaked, waving desperately. Something about her posture, the way she hugged herself against the cold, struck Derek's conscience. He told himself he'd just take her to the next truck stop, get her out of the weather, maybe buy her a meal. He pulled over, and she ran to the passenger door. Derek unlocked it, and she climbed in, dripping water onto a seat. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to her face. Her jacket was inadequate for November weather, thin denim, no hood. "Thank you," she gasped, shivering violently. "Thank you so much. I didn't think anyone would stop." "You shouldn't be out here," Derek said, pulling back on a highway. "What happened? Car breakdown?" She nodded, wiping rain from her face. "A few miles back. My phone's dead. I've been walking for over an hour." Derek turned up the heat. "There's a truck stop about 30 miles ahead. I can drop you there. They'll have a phone you can use." "That's fine. That's perfect. Thank you." She settled into the seat, still shivering. Derek grabbed a blanket from the seat and handed it to her. "Wrap up in that. You're freezing." She took the blanket with a grateful smile. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Derek kept his eyes on the rain-slicked highway, hydroplaning a concern at their speed. The woman, she hadn't offered her name, seemed content to just sit and warm up. "I'm Derek, by the way," he said, trying to be friendly. "Sarah," she replied quietly. More silence. Derek noticed she kept staring straight ahead, not looking around the cab like most passengers would. People usually show curiosity about the truck's interior, the equipment, the personal items drivers kept. Sarah just stared forward with an intensity that started to make him uncomfortable. "You from around here?" Derek asked. "Not really. Where were you heading?" "West." Her answers were minimal, almost robotic. Derek decided to stop trying to make conversation. Some people didn't want to talk, and that was fine. 10 miles passed. The rain continued its assault on the windshield, wipers working at maximum speed. Derek glanced at Sarah. She hadn't moved since putting on the blanket. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. Her chest rose and fell with slow, regular breaths. "You doing okay?" Derek asked, warming up. "Yes, thank you." Her voice sounded different, flatter, more mechanical. Derek attributed it to exhaustion. The woman had been walking in freezing rain for an hour. She was probably in the early stages of hypothermia. Another 10 miles. Derek was starting to anticipate the truck stop, ready to be rid of his passenger and her uncomfortable silence. He glanced at her again and felt his breath catch. She hadn't blinked. He'd been peripherally aware of her for the last several minutes, and she hadn't blinked once. She just stared forward with unnatural stillness, like a mannequin. "Sarah?" Derek said. "You sure you're all right?" She turned her head to look at him, the movement stiff and mechanical, like a security camera rotating on a mount. When her eyes met his, Derek felt ice water dump down his spine. Her eyes were wrong. The pupils too large, The iris is too dark, and something about the way they focus on him felt predatory. "I'm fine," she said, still in that flat, emotionless tone. Derek faced forward again, hands tightening on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. He considered pulling over, telling her to get out, but what reason could he give? She'd done nothing threatening. She was just strange. The exit for the truck stop appeared ahead. Derek took it with relief, following the off-ramp to the service plaza. Lights blazed through the rain. A truck stop, fast food restaurants, a motel. Normal, safe, populated. He pulled into the truck parking area and set the brake. Here we are. They got phones inside, hot food, you can get yourself sorted out. Sarah didn't move. She continued staring forward at the rain-streaked windshield. "Sarah, this is your stop." "I don't want to leave," she said quietly. Derek felt alarm bells ringing. "Look, I can't take you any further. Company policy. No either's. I could lose my job." "I don't want to leave," she repeated. Exactly the same inflection, like a recording. "You need to get out now." Derek reached across to open her door. When his hand touched the handle, Sarah's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was impossibly strong. Derek gasped in pain as her fingers dug into his flesh, feeling like they might crush bone. He tried to pull away, but she held him effortlessly. "I don't want to leave," she said again, and this time when Derek looked at her face, he saw that her features were subtly wrong. The proportions had shifted, eyes slightly too far apart, mouth too wide, nose too small. It was like looking at a person through distorted glass, except the distortion was in the person themselves. "Were you?" Derek whispered, fear making his voice shake. Sarah's mouth curved into a smile that was all wrong, showing too many teeth. "I was like you once. I drove trucks. I picked up a hitchhiker. And then I became what I am now. We spread this way, driver to driver, traveling the highways. When you picked me up, I entered your vehicle. Now I'm part of it, part of you. And you'll carry me until you pick up the next one, and then you'll be free. But they'll take your place." Derek yanked his arm back with all his strength. Sarah's grip released suddenly, and he tumbled back against his door. She sat there, still smiling that horrible smile. "You can't make me leave," she said. "I'm not really here anymore. I'm in the truck now, in the metal and the wires. You brought me in, and now I stay until you transfer me." Derek threw open his door and jumped out into the rain. He ran toward the truck stop, looking back over his shoulder, through the rain and darkness. He could see Sarah sitting in his passenger seat, perfectly still, watching him with those wrong eyes. He burst into the truck stop, soaking wet, wild-eyed. Other truckers stared at him as he approached the counter. "Call the police," he gasped. "There's someone in my truck. Someone who won't leave." The attendant looked alarmed. "Sir, calm down. What's happening?" "Just call them." Attendant picked up the phone while another trucker, a big guy with a gray beard, stood up. "Which truck is yours, buddy?" Derek pointed through the window. His Freightliner was visible in the parking lot, lights still on. The passenger seat was empty. "There's no one there," the bearded trucker said. "She was just..." Derek ran back outside, the bearded trucker following. They reached Derek's truck, and Derek climbed up to look inside. The passenger seat was empty. The blanket he'd given Sarah lay neatly folded. The seat was dry. No water. No sign anyone had sat there in rain. "You feeling okay?" the bearded trucker asked. "Maybe you need some rest." Derek stared at the empty seat. Had he imagined it? Was he losing his mind? He checked into a motel attached to the truck stop, telling himself he just needed sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in bed, listening to the rain, replaying the encounter in his mind. Sarah's grip on his wrist, her changing features, her words about being transferred from driver to driver. At 3 a.m., Derek gave up on sleep and decided to continue driving. He walked out to his truck, climbed into the cab, and reached for the ignition. Sarah was sitting in the passenger seat. Derek screamed and fell backward out of the cab, landing hard on the wet pavement. He scrambled to his feet and looked again. The seat was empty. But as he stood there, breathing hard, he heard a voice from his truck's CB radio, even though it wasn't turned on. "I told you, I'm in the truck now. You can't make me leave. And every time you climb into this cab, I'll be here, whether you see me or not." Derek backed away from the truck, horror washing over him. He couldn't drive it. He couldn't get in that cab knowing she was there, visible or not. He called his dispatcher at dawn, told him he was sick, and took a bus home to Kentucky. He never explained what happened, just resigned in the company and let them keep the truck. For months afterward, he checked news reports, waiting to hear about another driver, his replacement, experiencing something strange. 7 months later, he found it. A brief article about a trucker named James Connolly, who claimed someone was living in his truck, a woman he could see sometimes but other drivers couldn't. Connolly had driven Derek's old Freightliner off the road, insisting the woman was grabbing at the wheel. The truck was totaled. Connolly was committed for a psychiatric evaluation. Derek wanted to feel relieved. Maybe the thing called Sarah was gone, destroyed in the crash. But 2 years later, he saw another article. A trucker in Oregon reported picking up a female hitchhiker who refused to leave his vehicle. The trucker had abandoned his rig at a rest stop and walked away. The truck was empty, but other drivers reported seeing a woman in the passenger seat. When they looked through the windows, Derek realized then that Sarah, or whatever wore Sarah's shape, was still out there, still traveling the highways, still getting picked up by drivers who thought they were helping someone in need. And each time, she'd remain until the driver transferred her to someone else, or until the driver broke, unable to share their cab with something that shouldn't exist. He never drove professionally again. But sometimes, late at night, Derek hears a voice in his head, flat and mechanical, "I don't want to leave." And he knows that even though he abandoned the truck, even though he walked away, some part of that encounter remained with him. Some trace of Sarah's presence lodged in his mind, a passenger who would ride with him forever, invisible but undeniably present. And he wonders, in his darkest moments, if he'd become like her, if he's carrying something now that will transfer to the next person who shows him kindness, who lets him into their space, who makes the mistake of picking up someone who seems human but fundamentally isn't. Story 4. The Convoy to Nowhere. Thomas Bradley specialized in overnight runs across the American Southwest, driving a Peterbilt 579 loaded with whatever freight needed moving. He was 41 years old, divorced, no kids, and the highway was his life. On August 22nd, 2020, Thomas was hauling building materials from Phoenix to Albuquerque, taking Interstate 40 through the Arizona desert. It was 11:47 p.m. when he first noticed a convoy. 3 other semis appeared in his mirrors, all following him at precisely the same distance, maintaining perfect spacing. Thomas didn't think much of it initially. Truckers often ended up traveling together, especially on long, empty stretches of highway. But as miles passed, the convoy remained in exact formation. Thomas sped up to 70 miles per hour. The 3 trucks behind him accelerated to match. He slowed to 60. They slowed with him, maintaining that same precise distance. Thomas picked up his CB radio. "Hey, you drivers behind me. You're making me nervous with that tight formation. How about some space?" Static crackled, then a voice responded. "This is Raven 1. Maintain current speed and heading. Do not deviate from route." Thomas felt a chill. Raven 1, that sounded like military call signs, not trucker handles. "Who is this? Why are you following me?" "Maintain current speed and heading." The voice repeated, identical inflection, like a recording. Thomas's instincts screamed danger. He took the next exit, pulling off I-40 onto a smaller highway. In his mirrors, all 3 trucks followed, taking the perfect synchronization. "Okay, this isn't funny," Thomas said into the CB. "Back off, or I'm calling the cops." No response this time, just the 3 trucks, maintaining their formation behind him. Thomas grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911. The call connected, but instead of an operator, he heard only static. He tried again. Same result. The smaller highways stretched through empty desert, no towns or services visible. Thomas pushed his speed higher, and the convoy matched him. He tested them again, slowing abruptly. They slowed instantly, as if connected to his truck by invisible ropes. Then the first truck in the convoy behind him flashed its lights, a pattern, long, short, long, short. Morse code, Thomas realized with growing dread. He'd learned it in Boy Scouts decades ago. The message spelled out, "Join US." Join you? Join what? Thomas shouted into the CB. The three trucks flashed their lights in unison this time, a longer message. "You drive forever now. We drive forever. No stops. No rest. Only driving." Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. What did that mean? He looked at his fuel gauge, half a tank, enough for maybe 200 miles. He'd have to stop eventually. As if reading his thoughts, the CB crackled. "Fuel is irrelevant. You will understand soon." Thomas noticed something impossible then. His fuel gauge wasn't moving. He'd been driving for over an hour at high speed, but the needle remained fixed at half a tank. He tapped the gauge, thinking it was stuck, but it moved freely under his finger before returning to exactly the same position. He checked his odometer. It showed 147,823 miles, the same reading it had shown when he left Phoenix. He'd driven at least 80 miles since then, but the odometer hadn't changed. "What's happening?" Thomas whispered, fear making his voice shake. The CB answered, "You entered the convoy route. We all entered it. Each of us on different nights, different years. Now we drive. We cannot stop. The highway will not let us." Thomas saw a truck stop ahead, lights blazing against the darkness. He made a snap decision and yanked the wheel, pulling into the parking lot. His truck responded, but as he tried to slow down, the brake pedal went soft. He pressed harder. Nothing. The brake was dead. Thomas gripped the wheel as his truck rolled to the parking lot, somehow not hitting any parked vehicles despite his speed. Other truckers walked past, seemingly oblivious to his presence. Thomas waved desperately out the window, but no one looked at him. It was as if he and his truck were in. His momentum carried him through the truck stop and back onto the highway, where he merged seamlessly back into traffic. The three convoy trucks remained behind him, unmoved by his attempted escape. "You cannot leave the highway," the CB voice explained. "We tried. All of us tried. The road has us now. We exist only to drive. Watch your mirrors. Soon you will see what we see." Thomas looked in his mirrors at the three trucks following him. In the darkness, it was hard to make out details, but now he stared harder, trying to see the drivers in their cabs. The trucks had no drivers. The cabs were empty or appeared empty, yet they maintained perfect formation, matching his every move. "We're your drivers," Thomas called into CB. "We are the trucks," came the reply. "We were men once, like you, but the highway took us, absorbed us. Now we're the vehicles. Our consciousness, our awareness, exists in the metal and engine. The truck is our body. The highway is our world. And we cannot leave." Thomas felt his sanity beginning to crack. This couldn't be real. It was exhaustion, hallucination, something. He pinched himself hard enough to leave a bruise. The pain felt real. Everything felt real. Hours passed. The sun should have risen, but darkness persisted. Thomas checked his dashboard clock, 11:47 p.m. The same time he'd first noticed the convoy. The clock wasn't moving forward. "Time doesn't pass here," the CB voice said. "We exist in a moment. Stretch forever. You will grow accustomed to it." Thomas tried everything. He attempted to crash his truck, steering toward barriers, but his truck wouldn't impact them. It phased through solid objects like a ghost. He tried to shut off the engine, but turning the key had no effect. The truck continued running, continued driving, with or without his input. He could still steer, still control his direction, but only within the boundaries of the highway. Whenever he tried to leave the road, his truck refused, continuing forward as if on rails. Days passed, or what felt like days, though the clock never moved and the sun never rose. Thomas stopped trying to escape and simply drove, hands on the wheel, watching the endless desert scroll past. The three convoy trucks remained behind him, constant companions. Other trucks appeared sometimes, normal truckers going about their routes. Thomas tried to signal them, but they never responded, never seemed to see him. He existed in a parallel version of the highway, separate from the real world, trapped in an eternal midnight. The CB voice spoke occasionally, telling him things. There are 47 of us now, different routes, all trapped in the same moment. Some have been here for decades. One driver entered in 1973. He still drives his old Kenworth somewhere in Texas, circling the same 100-mile loop forever. Thomas began to feel changes in himself. His need for food diminished, then disappeared. His bladder never filled. His body seemed to require nothing. Sustained by the same impossible logic that kept his fuel tank at half, he was becoming like the others, no longer quite human, no longer quite alive in any conventional sense. He wondered about his load, the building materials he was hauling. He stopped at one point and checked the trailer. It was empty. Whatever he'd been carrying had vanished, or perhaps had never existed. The trailer itself was changing, rusting and corroding at visible speed, falling apart and rebuilding itself in a continuous cycle. One night, though it was always night, Thomas saw something new. A sign appeared on the highway. Exit 0, nowhere, and no services. He'd never seen an exit marked that way. Against all logic, he took it. The exit ramp spiraled downward, descending far deeper than any normal ramp should. Thomas's truck followed the spiral down and down, into darkness that was somehow darker than the night he'd been driving through. At the bottom, the highway opened into a vast underground space, a cavern so large Thomas couldn't see the far walls. And parked throughout this space were trucks. Hundreds of trucks, maybe thousands, all sitting silently, lights off, no drivers visible. Thomas's truck pulled to stop among them, and finally, the engine shut off. Silence descended, absolute and overwhelming after the constant engine noise. The CB crackled one last time. "Welcome to the depot. This is where we rest between routes. You're one of us now, Thomas Bradley. You'll drive your route for what feels like years, then return here to wait. And eventually, you'll be assigned a new route and you'll drive again. Forever. This is the price for entering the convoy. This is what the highway demands." Thomas sat in his cab, surrounded by hundreds of empty trucks, and understood that his life as he'd known it was over. He was part of something now, a phantom fleet that traveled roads existing slightly out of phase with reality, driven by men who were no longer quite men, trapped in vehicles that had become their prisons and their bodies. Time passed. He couldn't say how much. Eventually, his engine started on its own. His dashboard clock reset to 11:47 p.m. His truck began moving, navigating through the depot of phantom vehicles and back up the spiral ramp to the highway. When he emerged, he was on a different road, Interstate 90 in Montana, according to a sign he passed. He'd been transported hundreds of miles in an instant. Behind him, 3 different trucks fell into formation, the convoy reforming with new members. And Thomas drove. He drives still, somewhere on America's highways, visible only to those who are about to join him. If you're a trucker and you see a convoy following too close in perfect formation late at night, if they flash their lights in patterns that spell out messages, if your cell phone stops working and your CB picks up voices telling you to maintain your speed, you've been marked. You're about to join the convoy to nowhere, and you'll drive forever, trapped in an eternal 11:47 p.m., hauling nothing through darkness that never ends, becoming less human and more machine with every passing mile that your odometer will never record. Some truckers claim to have seen Thomas's Peterbilt, Arizona plates, hauling an empty trailer that cycles between pristine and rusted. They say if you look close at the driver, you can see his face, exhausted, terrified, but still gripping the wheel, still maintaining his route, because stopping is not an option. The highway has him now, and the highway never lets go. Story 5. The rest stopped at aged. Patricia Nguyen had been a long-haul trucker for 9 years, specializing in refrigerated cargo across the Pacific Northwest. On June 17, 2019, she was hauling frozen seafood from Seattle to Portland, driving her white Volvo VNL. It was a routine run she'd made hundreds of times, but fatigue was catching up with her. After 6 hours straight, her eyelids grew heavy, and she knew she needed rest. A rest stop appeared ahead, one of those small state-maintained facilities with parking spaces, restrooms, and vending machines. Patricia pulled in, noting that only two other vehicles were present, a silver sedan and a motorcycle. The place was well lit and seemed well maintained, exactly what she needed for a quick nap. She parked her rig, set her alarm for 2 hours, and reclined her seat. Sleep came quickly. The alarm woke her at precisely 2 hours as programmed. Patricia sat up, rubbing her eyes, feeling refreshed. Through her windshield, she noticed something odd. The other vehicles were still there in exactly the same positions. The silver sedan, the motorcycle, neither had moved. She climbed down from her cab and walked toward the restroom facility. As she approached, she noticed the building looked different. The paint was more faded than she remembered, peeling in places. Had it looked this weather when she'd arrived? She couldn't recall clearly. Inside the women's restroom, Patricia found the facilities functional but deteriorating. Rust stained the sinks. Tiles had cracked. One light fixture hung loose from the ceiling. For a state-maintained rest stop, this was unusual. They typically kept these facilities in good repair. When she emerged, she checked the information board near the entrance. Usually, these boards displayed maps and tourist information. This one held faded, curling papers covered in mold. She tried to read a map, but the paper crumbled at her touch, disintegrating into fragments. Patricia felt unease creeping in. She walked to the silver sedan parked nearby. Dust covered it. Not a light coating, but heavy accumulation, like it had sat for months. She wiped the window and peered inside. The interior looked weathered, upholstery faded and cracked. The motorcycle was worse. Rust covered the chrome. The tires were flat and rotting. The seat had split, foam poking through. "Hello," Patricia called out, her voice echoing across the empty rest stop. "Anyone here?" No response came. She looked at the picnic area beyond the parking lot. Wooden tables that should have been relatively new looked ancient. With gray and splintered, benches collapsed. Patricia pulled out her phone. No signal. She checked the time for 17 a.m., but something was wrong. Her phone's date read June 17th, 2024, 5 years in future. She stared at the screen, certain it was a glitch. She restarted the phone. When it powered back on, the same date appeared, June 17th, 2024. "Okay, this is just a phone malfunction," Patricia said aloud, trying to calm herself. But her voice sounded hollow in the strange silence of the rest stop. She walked back to her truck, intending to leave immediately. But when she looked at her Volvo, her heart nearly stopped. The truck looked weathered. Paint had faded significantly. Rust showed along the wheel wells. The windshield had cracks she was certain hadn't been there before. Patricia ran to the cab and climbed in. She turned the key. The engine turned over sluggishly, reluctantly, but finally started. She checked the trailer's refrigeration unit. Still running, but the display showed error codes. She put the truck in gear and headed for the rest stop exit, back onto the highway. But as she drove, she noticed the highway itself looked wrong. The pavement was more cracked than she remembered, with weeds growing through fissures. The road markings were faded nearly to invisibility. After 10 minutes of driving, Patricia saw a sign, Portland, 87 miles. She'd driven away from Portland, not toward it. Somehow, she was heading the wrong direction. She must have gotten confused in her sleep-fog state. Executed a U-turn at the next crossover and headed back, passing the rest stop again. It looked even more deteriorated now. The building's roof partially collapsed, several windows broken. Patricia drove for an hour and saw no other vehicles. The highway remained empty, stretching through forests that seemed overgrown, encroaching on the road. She should have reached the outskirts of Portland by now, but instead, the forest continued endlessly. Her fuel gauge caught her attention. It showed less than a quarter tank. She'd fueled up before the rest stop. Should have had plenty. Had she been driving longer than she thought? Time felt slippery, unreliable. A gas station appeared ahead, its sign dark. Patricia pulled in, hoping the pump still functioned. The station looked abandoned, windows boarded, Roof partially caved in, but one pump appeared intact. She tried her credit card. The reader was dead. She tried the pump anyway. To her surprise, it worked. Fuel flowed into her tank. The pump's mechanical counter ticked upward, but no digital display showed cost. Patricia filled her tank, grateful but deeply unsettled. As she finished, she heard a sound, an engine. Another vehicle approached from the highway. Hope surged in Patricia's chest. She waved as a pickup truck pulled into the station. The driver was an older man with a weathered face. He stared at Patricia with wide eyes, shock evident on his features. "How are you here?" he asked, voice rough. "How are you real?" "What do you mean?" Patricia asked. "I'm just trying to get to Portland. I stopped at a rest stop, and everything's been wrong since." The man climbed out his truck slowly, as if afraid Patricia might disappear. "Which rest stop?" "The one about 20 miles back. Small place. 2 buildings, picnic area." "That rest stop's been closed for 3 years," the man said quietly. "Shut down due to structural damage. It's condemned." "I was just there. I parked, took a nap." "When?" The man interrupted. "When did you stop there?" "Last night, June 17th, 2019. The man's face went pale. "It's June 17th, 2024. 5 years later." Patricia felt the world tilting. "That's not possible. I slept for 2 hours. Just 2 hours." "You're not the first," the man said quietly. "There have been others over the years. Drivers who stop at that rest stop and disappear. Sometimes they come back, like you, but they're always displaced. Time works differently there. Some people lose days. Some lose years. One driver lost 20 years. Went in as a young man, came out elderly. Why? What's causing it?" The man shook his head. "No one knows. The state tried to demolish the rest stop, but workers refused to stay there. They reported feeling watched, feeling like time was moving wrong. Eventually, they just fenced it off and put up warning signs. But the signs keep disappearing, like something doesn't want people warned." Patricia leaned against her truck, trying to process. "What about my family? My dispatcher? They must have reported me missing. If you stopped in 2019, then yes. You've been missing for 5 years. I am sorry." Patricia checked her phone again, this time looking at her contacts, her messages. The most recent were from 2019. 5 years of her life, gone in what felt like 2 hours of sleep. "What do I do?" she whispered. "Go to Portland." The man said, "Find your family. Try to rebuild. That's all anyone can do. The rest stop took time from you, but you escaped. Some people never come back." Patricia drove to Portland in a daze. The city looked both familiar and different. New buildings, old ones renovated or demolished. Changes 5 years would naturally bring. She went to her old apartment and found strangers living there. She went to her dispatcher's office and found the company had been sold, reorganized. Finally, she went to her sister's house. When the door opened and her sister saw her, the woman collapsed in shock. Patricia had been declared dead 3 years ago, missing and presumed deceased after her truck was found abandoned at a condemned rest stop, empty, with no trace of the driver. The frozen seafood Patricia had been hauling had rotted in the trailer over years of sitting, the refrigeration unit eventually failing. Her truck had been found weathered and aged, as if exposed to elements for years, though it had been missing only weeks when discovered. Authorities questioned Patricia extensively. She told them the truth, that she'd slept for 2 hours and woken up 5 years later. They didn't believe her, suspecting mental illness or an elaborate hoax. But her confusion was genuine, her distress real, and eventually, they let her go. Patricia never drove a truck again. She couldn't. The experience had broken something fundamental in her trust of time and space. She took a job in her sister's bakery, staying close, avoiding highways. But sometimes, she dreams she's back in that rest stop, parking her truck for a quick nap. In the dreams, she sees the other drivers, the ones who own the silver sedan and the motorcycle. They're asleep in their vehicles, and they've been asleep for decades, aging slowly while the world outside rushes forward. And in her dreams, a voice echoing across the empty parking lot. Time is different here. The rest stop takes payment for your rest. You wanted to sleep? You slept. But sleep here is measured in years, not hours. Patricia woke from these dreams terrified, checking her calendar obsessively, making sure time was passing normally. She kept every receipt, every newspaper, every piece of evidence that she existed in the correct year, because she knew the rest stop was still there, sitting just off the highway, waiting for tired drivers who needed rest. Its signs might be gone, its warnings removed, but it persisted in whatever pocket of distorted space-time it occupied. And Patricia knew that somewhere right now, a driver was pulling into that rest stop, thinking they'd found a safe place to sleep. They'd set their alarm for 2 hours, close their eyes, and wake up to find that the world had aged around them while they slept, that years had passed in what felt like moments. The rest stop never closed. Not really. It just continued existing, slightly out of phase with normal time, offering rest to weary travelers and taking payment in years stolen, in futures erased, in lives displaced and disrupted. Patricia wrote warnings online, posting in trucker forums about the rest stop's location, trying to save others from her fate. But her posts were always deleted, removed by moderators who thought she was spreading hoaxes or conspiracy theories. And she knew with terrible certainty that the rest stop would continue to claim victims, because tired drivers would always need to rest. And some places, some awful places, exist specifically to prey on that need, to transform a moment of vulnerability into years of stolen life. 5 years gone. 5 years she'd never get back. All for 2 hours of sleep she couldn't refuse. Story 6. The radio frequency from somewhere else. Victor Reyes was a veteran trucker with 31 years of experience, driving a classic Mac anthem across the Midwest. He prided himself on his old-school approach. He still used CB radio extensively, preferred paper maps to GPS, and maintained his own rig with tools that had served him for decades. On January 8th, 2022, Victor was hauling agricultural equipment from Des Moines to Minneapolis, taking Highway 35 north through Iowa. It was a clear winter night, temperature hovering around 15 degrees, roads dry and mostly empty. Victor had the radio on, scanning channels out of habit. The CB frequencies were quiet, not unusual for late night on a Sunday. Most truckers were either home or sleeping at truck stops. Then, at 1:23 a.m., a new frequency appeared on his radio, channel 99. Victor frowned. CB only had 40 channels. 99 shouldn't exist. He must have bumped a knob, creating some kind of interference. But when he tried to change the channel, the radio wouldn't respond. It remained locked on 99. A voice emerged from the static, clear and precise. Attention all drivers on the parallel highway. Weather advisory. Temporal storm approaching from northwest. Expected arrival, 6 minutes. Seek shelter in approved waypoints immediately. Victor grabbed the transmitter. This is Victor Reyes, northbound on Highway 35. Who is this? What frequency am I on? Victor Reyes. The voice replied immediately as if expecting him. You are receiving broadcast from Highway 35 parallel. You have crossed into overlap zone. Temporal storm will affect both highways. Recommend immediate. Static consumed the voice. Victor stared at his radio in confusion. Highway 35 parallel? He'd never heard of such a thing. There was only one Highway 35 through this region. He looked out his windshield at the empty road ahead. Everything appeared normal. White lines marking lanes, reflector posts along the shoulder, occasional signs indicating distance to towns. Then he saw another truck. It appeared suddenly in his headlights, parked on the shoulder ahead. But something about it was wrong. The truck looked simultaneously solid and translucent, like an image projected on smoke. Victor slowed as he approached, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The truck flickered, phasing in and out of visibility. One moment it was there, clear as day. The next, it faded to transparency, then solid again. Victor grabbed his CB transmitter. Highway 35. Anyone seeing this? There's a truck on the shoulder doing something impossible. The radio crackled, and a different voice responded, gruff, frightened. Who is this? How are you on this frequency? Are you authority? Authority? What? No, I'm just a driver. Victor Reyes. Who are you? Marcus. Marcus Chun. Listen to me carefully. If you can hear both frequencies, you're in the overlap. The storm is coming. You need to find a waypoint and anchor yourself to your reality, or you'll slip through permanently. Victor felt fear rising. Marcus, I don't understand what you're talking about. What storm? What reality? There are multiple highways. Marcus said urgently. Same road, different dimensions, frequencies, whatever you want to call them. Usually they're separate, but sometimes they overlap and storms happen. Temporal storms that shuffle people between realities. If you get caught in, you might end up on Highway 35 parallel or Highway 35 shadow or one of the others, and you might not be able to get back. This is insane, Victor said. But even as he spoke, he saw more trucks appearing and disappearing on the road around him. Some looked normal. Others were strange, wrong colors, wrong designs, trucks that looked futuristic or impossibly old-fashioned. Look for a waypoint, Marcus insisted. They're marked with triple reflectors, 3 in a row, red, green, blue. Park between them, and don't move until the storm passes. How do you know all this? Victor demanded. Because I've been trapped on Highway 35 parallel for 3 years. Marcus said quietly, I was like you. I thought I was on the normal highway. Then the storm hit, and I slipped through. Now I drive this version of the road, and I can't find my way back. There are others here too. Dozens of us, all trapped on parallel highways. Victor's hands tightened on the wheel. He remembered the story he dismissed as urban legend, a driver named Marcus Chun who disappeared on Highway 93 in Nevada. Could this be the same person? The radio frequency shifted again, and the first voice returned, the calm, precise one. Temporal storm arrival. 2 minutes. All drivers without waypoint access must immediately. The transmission cut off as Victor's entire truck shuddered. Outside, the landscape began to distort. The road ahead seemed to split into multiple versions of itself, each slightly different, all occupying the same space. Victor saw himself reflected in these other roads, versions of his truck existing in parallel, driving the same route, but on different frequencies of reality. The storm hit like a physical impact. Victor's vision blurred as multiple images superimposed over each other. He saw Highway 35 as it was, and simultaneously, he saw other versions. One where the road was packed with traffic despite the late hour. One where the highway was crumbling and overgrown with vegetation. One where the road surface glowed with embedded lights. One where strange vehicles that weren't quite trucks or cars traveled at impossible speeds. His radio exploded with voices, hundreds of them, all talking over each other. Drivers from all the parallel highways suddenly able to hear each other during the storm. Trapped for 8 years on Highway 90 shadow. Anyone reading this from baseline reality. The storms are getting worse. Saw my own truck pass me going the opposite direction. Waypoint collapsed, need help. Victor fought to keep his truck on what he hoped was the real road, but it was impossible to tell which version was genuine. The landscape kept shifting, now farmland, now forest, now urban sprawl, now empty wasteland. Span of seconds. Then he saw it. 3 reflectors in a row, red, green, blue, marking a wide shoulder area. Victor yanked his wheel and pulled into the space between the markers. The moment his truck stopped between them, the distortion lessened. He could still see the multiple versions of reality overlapping, but they seemed unable to affect him directly within the waypoint. Other trucks appeared, also parked at waypoints, visible across the dimensional boundaries. Victor saw perhaps 20 trucks, all sitting in what looked like the same location but slightly offset, existing in parallel spaces. His CB crackled. Good. You made it to a waypoint. Now you wait. It was Marcus Chen's voice again. The storm will pass. Usually takes about an hour. When it's over. If you're lucky, you'll still be on your original highway. If you're not, welcome to the parallel. How did this start? Victor asked, needing to understand. How are there multiple highways? No one knows for sure, Marcus replied. Some of the drivers who've been trapped longest think the highways were always layered, always overlapping. Human roads built on top of routes that existed before, maybe ancient trade paths, maybe something else. And sometimes the layers shift and connect, and people slip between them. Victor watched through his windshield as the storm raged. Ghost images of vehicles passed through his truck. Other drivers on other versions of the highway, unaware they were sharing space with him. He saw trucks from different eras. A 1950s delivery truck, a futuristic vehicle that moved without wheels, a horse-drawn wagon overlaid with the image of semi-truck, as if past and future were bleeding into the present. Time felt distorted. His dashboard clock froze, then jumped forward, then backward. Victor's phone showed impossible dates. Years in the future, years in the past. Dates that hadn't happened yet or had happened centuries ago. Don't look at the time, Marcus advised through the radio. It'll make you crazy. Just wait for the storm to pass. Hours crawled by, or minutes, or days. Victor couldn't tell. He saw things in the storm that defied explanation. Roads that curved upward into the sky, highways that descended into the earth, vehicles that existed as pure light or pure shadow. He saw drivers in other trucks, some looking terrified, some looking resigned, some looking completely unaware that anything was wrong. Eventually, the storm began to subside. The multiple images of reality started to separate, pulling apart like layers of film. Victor felt his truck settle, becoming more solid, more singular. The landscape outside resolved into familiar Iowa farmland. His radio cut back to normal CB frequencies. Channel 99 was gone. His dashboard clock showed 2:47 a.m. He'd been parked for an hour and 24 minutes, though it felt like much longer. Victor cautiously pulled back on the highway. Everything looked normal. He drove carefully, watching for any sign that he'd slipped to a parallel highway. But all seemed well. The road markers progressed normally. Towns appeared where they should. His GPS functioned correctly. He completed his delivery to Minneapolis without further incident. But Victor couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Small details seemed off. The Minneapolis skyline looked slightly different. Buildings and places he didn't remember. Street names were almost right, but not quite. His dispatcher's voice on the phone sounded familiar, but with subtle differences in inflection. Victor did research when he got home. He looked up Marcus Chun. The story existed, but the details were different from what he remembered. Chun had disappeared on Highway 35 in Iowa, not Highway 93 in Nevada. The date was different too. Had these facts always been this way? Or had Victor slipped to a reality almost identical to his own, but with slight variations? He could never be sure, and that uncertainty haunted him. Victor continued driving, but he was always alert now, always watching for the telltale signs. Radio frequencies that shouldn't exist, ghost images of trucks appearing and disappearing, triple reflectors marking waypoints. He learned to recognize when he was approaching an overlap zone. The air felt different, charged with static electricity, and his radio would pick up fragments of those other frequencies. He encountered several more minor storms over following years, always finding a waypoint in time, always emerging back onto what seemed like the correct highway. But each time, he noticed small changes. Favorite restaurants closed or never having existed. Roads he remembered being slightly different routes. People he knew having memories that didn't quite match his own. Victor realized he might be slowly sliding between parallel highways, never fully settling in any single reality. With each storm, he shifted slightly, ending up in a version of the world almost identical to the previous one, but not quite the same. Other truckers began to recognize him, or versions of him. Occasionally, drivers would approach him at truck stops and say they'd seen his rig parked at a waypoint during a storm, but when they'd tried to contact him, he hadn't responded. Victor couldn't remember these incidents. He suspected they were encountering versions of him from parallel highways, caught in storms he hadn't experienced in his version of reality. The most disturbing encounter came 2 years after his first storm. Victor was parked at a rest stop in Wisconsin when another driver approached him, an older man with a "Victor Reyes?" the man asked. "That's me." The older man stared at him with profound sadness. I'm Victor Reyes, too, from Highway 35 Echo. I slipped 20 years ago. I've been trying to get back ever since. Seeing you, it's like seeing myself before I got lost. Victor stared at his older self, horror growing. Did you ever make it back? The older Victor shook his head. I don't even know if my original highway still exists or if I'd recognize it if I found it. After 20 years of sliding between parallels, I don't know which reality is real anymore. I'm just driving, forever driving, existing in all the versions and none of them. The older Victor walked away, leaving Victor standing alone in the parking lot, contemplating his own future. Now, when Victor drives at night and his radio picks up channel 99, he listens carefully to the warnings about temporal storms. He's memorized the locations of waypoints across the Midwest. He carries a journal where he records details about his reality, names of presidents, major historical events, personal memories, checking them against references to see if anything has changed after each storm. Because Victor knows that somewhere out there on one of the infinite parallel highways, there's a version of him who never encountered the first storm, who drives the original Highway 35 in the original reality, living a normal life. And Victor is slowly becoming untethered from that reality, sliding between versions, becoming a quantum driver existing in multiple frequencies simultaneously. The highway has many layers, and Victor travels them all, whether he wants to or not. Story 7. The Exit That Led Backwards. Leonard Walsh was 54 years old and had been driving professionally for 3 decades when he encountered exit 404 on Interstate 80 in Nebraska. It was September 15, 2017, around 9:30 p.m. Leonard was hauling office furniture from Omaha to Reno, driving his reliable Freightliner Coronado. The highway was quiet, stretching through rolling plains under a cloudless night sky. Leonard had driven this route hundreds of times and knew every town, every rest stop, every landmark. So when he saw a green sign indicating exit 404 to 1 mile, he knew immediately something was wrong. There was no exit 404 on this stretch of I-80. The exits in this area were numbered in the 390s. Leonard had never seen a 404 exit sign before. Curiosity pulled at him. In 30 years of driving, he'd never encountered a mystery quite like this. He decided to take the exit, just to see what was there. Maybe it was a new exit, recently constructed. Maybe his mental map of the highway updated. The off-ramp curved to the right, descending more steeply than seemed normal. Leonard slowed his truck, following the curve down and around. The ramp seemed longer than it should be, spiraling downward in a way that didn't match the relatively flat terrain. When he finally reached the bottom, Leonard found himself on a two-lane road that looked vaguely familiar. He couldn't immediately place it, but something about the configuration of signs and road surface triggered recognition. Then he saw a sign, Interstate 80 East 2 miles. Leonard frowned. He'd just exited I-80. Why would there be a sign directing him back to the same highway? He followed the road, confused but not yet alarmed. The two-lane road curved through countryside, and Leonard began to recognize landmarks. That bar with a distinctive red roof. He knew that barn. It was near Omaha, but he'd left Omaha hours ago. He should be well into western Nebraska by now. After 10 minutes, he reached an on-ramp and merged back onto Interstate 80. His GPS, which had been acting strangely since he took the exit, suddenly showed his location, just west of Omaha. Leonard had somehow traveled backward, over 200 miles. That's not possible, he muttered, checking his odometer. It showed the correct mileage. He'd driven forward, not backward. But according to every sign and his GPS, he was back where he'd started. He pulled onto the shoulder and stopped, trying to make sense of the situation. Had he gotten turned around? Had he somehow taken wrong turns and reversed his route without realizing it? But he'd been on I-80 the entire time, traveling west. There was no way to accidentally go east. Leonard decided to continue. Maybe his GPS was glitching. Maybe the signs were wrong. He'd drive west again and see what happened. 2 hours later, he saw the sign again, exit 404 to 1 mile. The same exit, appearing ahead of him, even though he'd taken already. Leonard felt his skin prickling with unease. He passed the exit this time, refusing to take it again. But 10 miles later, the sign appeared once more. Exit 404 to 1 mile. Leonard's heart rate accelerated. The exit was following him, or he was somehow encountering it repeatedly. He drove past it again. 5 miles later, exit 404 to 1 mile. The exit was appearing more frequently now. Leonard pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to outrun it. His speedometer climbed to 70, 75, 80 miles per hour. Exit 404 to 1 mile appeared every 2 miles now, regular as clockwork. Leonard grabbed his CB radio. Breaker, breaker. 80 westbound in Nebraska? I need confirmation. Is anyone seeing exit 404 signs? Static answered. Then a voice, faint and distant. Exit 404 doesn't exist on I-80 Nebraska. You sure you're seeing that? I'm seeing it over and over, Leonard said, fear creeping into his voice. And I took it once. It brought me back to where I started. Don't take it again, the voice advised. Sounds like you're in a loop. Sometimes highways do that. Create impossible geometries. You take the wrong exit, and you end up trapped driving the same section over and over. How do I get out? I don't know. I've heard stories but never experienced it myself. Some say you have to break the pattern somehow. Do something different. Leonard considered this. The next time the exit 404 sign appeared, he pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. If movement was causing the loop, maybe stopping would break it. He sat there for 10 minutes, engine idling. Then he pulled back onto the highway and continued west. Exit 404 appeared within a mile. Leonard tried varying his speed, changing lanes, turning his headlights off and on. Nothing worked. The exit continued to appear with predictable regularity, and each time he passed it, the interval before it appeared again decreased. Now it appeared every mile, then every half mile, then every quarter mile. The highway ahead became a repeating pattern. Stretch of road, exit 404 sign, repeat. Over and over, collapsing inward on itself. Leonard felt panic rising. He was trapped in a shrinking loop, the highway folding in on itself, compressing down to an impossibly small circuit. Then he saw other trucks. They appeared ahead of him, parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. Leonard slowed and pulled up next to the first one. The driver's cab was empty, but the engine was running, headlights on. He checked the second truck. Also empty, also running. 5 trucks total, all abandoned on the shoulder. Leonard grabbed his flashlight and climbed down. He approached the first truck and looked inside. A coffee cup sat in the holder, still steaming. A phone lay on the passenger seat. Screen showing an active navigation app. The driver had left recently, perhaps a moment ago. Hello, Leonard called into the darkness beyond the highway. Anyone out there? Movement in his peripheral vision made him spin around. A figure stood on the road behind him. A man in trucker clothes, middle-aged, with a blank expression. Did you take exit 404? The man asked. Yes, Leonard replied. Are you stuck here too? I took it in 2003, the man said flatly. I've been driving the loop for 14 years. Same section of highway, over and over. Sometimes other drivers appear. They usually give up and abandon their trucks. Give up and go where? Leonard asked. The man pointed into the darkness beyond the highway. Out there, some people try to walk away from the road. They never come back. Others get back in their trucks and keep driving the loop until they run out of fuel or food or sanity. Then they walk away too. What happens if you walk away from the highway? I don't know. I've never had the courage to try. I just keep driving. It's what I know. It's what I do. The man turned and walked back toward one of the abandoned trucks. He climbed into a cab and drove away, merging back onto the highway, heading west toward exit 404. Leonard stood alone in the darkness, trying to process. 14 years trapped in a loop. How many drivers had taken exit 400 for over the years? How many were still here, driving the same endless circuit? He made a decision. He wouldn't drive the loop forever. He wouldn't abandon his truck and walk into the darkness either. He would take exit 404 again, but this time he'd do something different. He'd break the pattern somehow. Leonard climbed back into his Freightliner and drove west. When exit 404 appeared, he took it, committing to the off-ramp. The spiraling descent began again, but this time, Leonard put his truck in reverse. He backed up the exit ramp, fighting against the curve, moving against the intended direction. It was dangerous and difficult, but Leonard persisted. His backup camera showed the highway above, getting closer as he reversed up the impossible spiral. Something resisted him. Not physical resistance, but a feeling like pushing through water, like the space itself was trying to prevent his movement. Leonard pressed harder on the accelerator, forcing his truck backward. And then, suddenly, he was on I-80 again, but something had changed. The highway looked different, older or newer. He couldn't quite tell. The pavement surface had a different texture. The lighting seemed wrong. Leonard checked his GPS. It showed his location as I-80 in Nebraska, but the surrounding town names were unfamiliar. They weren't places he'd ever heard of. Despite 30 years driving this route, he drove west cautiously, watching for exit 404. An hour passed. No sign appeared. He continued driving and eventually reached what appeared to be a normal exit near a town he didn't recognize. He took it, looking for information, for some way to orient himself. The town was wrong. Buildings were in styles he didn't recognize. Not quite modern, not quite historical. Something in between. Signs were written in English, but with strange spelling. People walked the streets, but their clothing looked slightly off, fashions that didn't quite match any era Leonard could identify. He stopped at what appeared to be a gas station, though the pumps looked different from any he'd seen. An attendant approached, a young man with a friendly smile. "Help you?" the attendant asked. "Where am I?" Leonard asked. "What town is this?" "Asherton," the attendant replied, looking puzzled by the question. "You feeling all right?" "Asherton, Nebraska?" "Asherton, yeah, though we haven't been part of Nebraska for about 20 years now, since the redistricting." Leonard felt reality sliding further away. Redistricting? After the '98 reorganization. You know, when they redrew all the state boundaries. Where are you from that you don't know this? Leonard couldn't answer. He was in a version of America where states had been reorganized, where towns existed that didn't exist in his reality, where history had taken a different path. By reversing up exit 404, he hadn't escaped the loop. He'd broken through to somewhere else entirely. A parallel America, similar but fundamentally different. He asked the attendant about recent presidents, major historical events. Most matched his memory, but with variations. Small things were different. Large things were surprisingly similar. He was in a reality very close to his own, but divergent in specific ways. Leonard spent 3 days in Asherton, trying to find a way back to his original reality. He drove highways looking for exit 40 for going the other direction, hoping to reverse his journey. But the exit never appeared. He was trapped in this alternate America, unable to return home. Eventually, Leonard accepted his situation. He found work with a local trucking company, using the experience from his 30 years of driving. He built a new life in this place that was almost his home, but not quite. Sometimes, late at night when he's driving the highways of this alternate America, Leonard sees signs for exit 404, but he never takes it. He learned his lesson. Some exits don't lead to places. They lead to other ones, other versions of reality. And once you take them, you might never find your way back to the reality you came from. He occasionally meets other drivers who have that same lost look in their eyes. People who took the wrong exit and ended up in the wrong version of America. They recognize each other without words, sharing the knowledge that they're refugees from parallel realities, driving highways that look almost right but aren't quite home. Leonard wrote down his story, leaving copies at truck stops across this alternate America, hoping that somewhere, someone from his original reality might find them and know what happened to him. He signs them all the same way. Exit 404 Survivor, 2017. And he keeps driving because that's what truckers do. But every time he sees an unfamiliar exit number, he passes it by, refusing to risk another jump to yet another reality, another version of America that's almost right but forever wrong. Story 8. The last delivery to Blackwood. Samantha Torres had been an expedited freight specialist for 15 years, handling time-sensitive deliveries across the eastern United States. She drove a custom Peterbilt 389 equipped for high-speed runs, and her record for on-time delivery was flawless. On December 23, 2021, Samantha received an urgent job: deliver medical supplies to a rural hospital in a town called Blackwood, West Virginia, before dawn. The dispatcher stressed the critical nature. A surgical team was waiting for specialized equipment to perform emergency procedures. Samantha accepted immediately. Time-sensitive medical runs were her specialty. She loaded the refrigerated containers into her trailer and programmed her GPS for Blackwood Regional Hospital. The route took her off Interstate 77 onto increasingly rural roads, climbing into the Appalachian Mountains. The GPS estimated arrival at 4:30 a.m., giving her just enough time before the scheduled surgery at 5 a.m. Samantha pushed her speed on the winding mountain roads, expertly handling curves she'd never driven before, but which felt familiar through years of experience. As midnight approached, snow began falling. Within minutes, it became a heavy snowstorm, visibility dropping to near zero. Samantha slowed, turning on her flashers, concentrating intently on the road. She couldn't afford to slide off into a ditch. Lives depended on her delivery. Through the swirling snow, a sign appeared: Blackwood, 5 miles. Relief flooded through Samantha. She was close. The GPS showed her approaching the town, a small cluster of buildings marking the hospital's location. She rounded a curve and saw Blackwood below her in a valley. Lights glowed in windows, street lamps illuminated snow-covered roads, and a larger building at the town center displayed a red cross. The hospital. Samantha carefully descended the mountain road into the valley. As she entered the town, she noticed how quiet it seemed. No vehicles moved on the streets. No people were visible despite the lit windows. But at 12:30 a.m. in a small mountain town, during a snowstorm, that wasn't necessarily unusual. She followed GPS directions to the hospital, a 3-story brick building that looked old but well-maintained. Samantha backed her trailer up to the loading dock and climbed down, her breath fogging in the cold air. The locked door was closed. She knocked loudly, waiting. After a minute with no response, she tried the door. It was unlocked. She entered a corridor lit by fluorescent lights, calling out, "Delivery for emergency surgery. Medical supplies." Silence answered. The corridor stretched ahead, doors lining both sides, all closed. Signs indicated different departments: radiology, pediatrics, surgery. Everything looked normal, just empty. "Hello?" Samantha called louder. "I have the medical supplies. Where is everyone?" She walked down the corridor, trying door handles. Most were locked. She found a nurse's station, desk covered with papers, computer monitors dark, a half-full coffee cup sitting on a keyboard. The coffee was still warm. Samantha's unease grew. Where was everyone? The hospital couldn't be completely empty. There should be staff, patients, someone. She tried a different corridor, this one leading toward the emergency room. As she walked, she noticed details that seemed wrong. The equipment looked old-fashioned, not antique, but dated, like medical technology from the 1990s. The color scheme on the walls was different too, in styles that had gone out of fashion decades ago. She found the emergency room. Empty beds, equipment sitting idle, nobody present. A board on the wall listed patient names and room numbers. Samantha checked the date at the top of the board, December 23, 1987. Samantha stared at the date, confusion washing over her. 1987? That was 34 years ago. This had to be an old board that hadn't been updated. But the handwriting looked fresh, the marker not faded. She pulled out her phone to call dispatch. No signal. She tried anyway, but the call wouldn't connect. Samantha returned to her truck, intending to check her paperwork. Maybe she'd come to the wrong hospital. But the delivery manifest clearly stated, Blackwood Regional Hospital, Blackwood, WV. As she stood there in the falling snow, she noticed something else strange. The snow on the ground showed no tracks except her own. Her truck's tires had left clear marks, but beyond those, the snow was pristine. No other vehicles had driven through town. No pedestrians had walked the sidewalks. Only her tracks marked the fresh snow. Samantha got back in her truck and drove through the town, looking for signs of life. She passed a gas station, lights on but no attendant visible. A diner, lights on, booths visible through the windows but empty. A school, a post office, residential homes, all lit but vacant. She parked outside the diner and went inside. The door was unlocked. Warm air greeted her. The interior looked frozen in time. A jukebox in the corner, vinyl-covered booth seats, a counter with chrome stools. Everything spotlessly clean, maintained, but no people. Coffee sat in a pot on the warmer, still hot. Samantha poured a cup with shaking hands. What was happening? Where was everyone? She noticed a newspaper on the counter. She picked it up. The Blackwood Gazette, dated December 23rd, 1987. The headline read, "Town Prepares for a Christmas Celebration." Samantha read the article. It described Blackwood's annual Christmas traditions, mentioning specific residents by name, describing planned events for Christmas Eve, everything written in present tense, as if the paper had been printed that day. But that day was 34 years ago. She left the diner and walked the snowy street, fear growing with each step. Something was profoundly wrong with Blackwood. This wasn't just an empty town. It was a town stuck in time, existing in 1987 while the rest of the world had moved on to 2021. Samantha returned to her truck and tried to leave. She drove toward the road she'd entered on, but as she reached the edge of town, the road disappeared. Where the mountain highway should have been, she found only forest, dense, impassable, as if the road had never existed. She tried a different route out of town. Same result. Every road leading out of Blackwood terminated in forest or cliff faces, or simply faded into nothing. The town was isolated, cut off from the outside world. Panic rising, Samantha drove back to the town center. She parked and forced herself to think logically. She'd received a delivery job for Blackwood. Her GPS had led her here. But now she was trapped in a town stuck in 1987, empty of people with no way out. She tried her radio, both CB and FM, only static. She tried her phone again, hoping for a signal. Nothing. Every communication with the outside world was severed. As dawn approached, Samantha noticed something else. The sky didn't lighten. Darkness persisted, and the snow continued falling. Her truck's dashboard clock showed 4:30 a.m., the time she was supposed to complete the delivery, but the clock stopped moving forward. It remained frozen at 4:30. Samantha sat in her truck cab, watching the unchanging darkness, the perpetual snowfall, and understood with growing horror that she might never leave Blackwood. She spent what might have been days exploring the town. She couldn't measure time since her clock never advanced. She found homes furnished and maintained, refrigerators stocked with food that never spoiled, water running from taps, electricity flowing. It sustained itself in this frozen moment, providing everything except people. In the town library, Samantha found newspaper archives. She read about Blackwood's history, and in December 1987, she found the answer. An article dated December 24th, 1987, described the tragedy. Entire town lost in Christmas Eve avalanche. Blackwood buried. No survivors. An avalanche had destroyed Blackwood on Christmas Eve 1987, burying the entire valley, killing everyone. The town should have been erased from existence. But somehow, it persisted in this pocket of frozen time, replaying the hours before its destruction over and over. And Samantha had driven into that pocket, drawn by a delivery request that shouldn't exist, to a town that was simultaneously dead and alive, existing in a moment repeated endlessly. She tried everything to escape. She attempted to drive her truck through the forest, but the vehicle wouldn't move beyond the town's borders, engine dying whenever she crossed the invisible boundary. She tried walking out on foot, but after hiking for hours, she always found herself back in Blackwood, as if the forest looped back on itself. Other people began to appear, the residents of Blackwood, living there December 23rd, 1987, completely unaware they were dead, trapped in a time loop. They greeted Samantha normally, asking if she was visiting for Christmas. When she tried to explain about the avalanche, about 2021, they looked at her with confusion. Then their faces went blank and they walked away, resetting to their programmed behaviors. Samantha realized she was the only conscious entity in this frozen moment. Everyone else was a recording, an echo replaying their last day alive. She left notes around the town, desperate messages. I am Samantha Torres. I am trapped in Blackwood. If anyone finds this, tell my family I love them. Tell them I was doing a delivery to a town that doesn't exist anymore. Tell them. But the notes disappeared when time reset, which happened periodically. The town would suddenly revert to an earlier state. The snow unmarked again, the coffee cups refilled. Everything returned to how it was at some fixed starting point. Samantha lost track of how many cycles she experienced. She tried to count them, marking her truck with scratches, but even those marks disappeared with each reset. Eventually, she saw another vehicle enter Blackwood, a delivery van, modern, from 2019 according to its license plate. The driver climbed out, looking confused, and Samantha ran to him, desperate for human contact, for confirmation she wasn't insane. Where did you come from? She gasped. The driver stared at her. I'm making a delivery to medical supplies. Who are you? When did you receive this job? Tonight. Urgent request. I'm supposed to. The driver checked his watch. I'm supposed to deliver by 4:30 a.m. Samantha felt her heart sink. What's your name? David. David Patterson. David, listen to me carefully. This town is a trap. It's frozen in time. We're stuck in December 23rd, 1987, repeating over and over. You need to. But David was shaking his head, backing away, clearly thinking she was insane. He got back in his van and drove toward the hospital. Samantha followed, trying to warn him, but he ignored her. When time reset again, David's van was gone. He'd become part of the cycle, or he'd found a way out that Samantha hadn't. She never saw him again. Over countless cycles, Samantha saw other vehicles appear, delivery drivers, ambulances, once a fire truck, all responded to urgent calls of Blackwood, all drawn into the trap. Most disappeared within a cycle or two. A few, like Samantha, persisted longer. She met a woman named Jennifer who'd been trapped for what felt like months, and an older man named Robert who claimed he'd been in Blackwood for years. They formed a strange community of the trapped, the only truly conscious entities in the town of Echoes. Together, they theorized about their situation. Blackwood existed as a moment frozen in time, and somehow it reached out to the present, creating false delivery jobs, drawing drivers into an eternal December 23rd, 1987. Perhaps the town itself was hungry for new souls, for living presence to fill its empty streets. Or perhaps it was simply a wound in time, an unhealed trauma that kept replaying, and anyone who entered became part of the wound. Samantha learned to find peace in the routine. She made her delivery to the empty hospital every cycle, unloading the medical supplies that would never be used for a surgery that would never happen. She drank coffee in the perpetual diner, walked the snowy streets, and tried to appreciate the strange beauty of this frozen moment. And she waited, hoping that someday, somehow, time would move forward. The clock would advance past 4:30 a.m., and Blackwood would finally experience December 24th, completing its interrupted cycle and perhaps the process. But the clock never moved. The snow never stopped. And Samantha Torres drives the streets of Blackwood still, trapped in her last delivery, in a town that died 34 years ago but refuses to acknowledge its own death. If you're a driver and you receive an urgent delivery job to Blackwood, West Virginia, refuse it. Check your maps. You won't find Blackwood on any list. The town was buried in 1987. It exists now only as a ghost, a temporal echo, and it hungers for the living to fill its empty streets. Samantha left one message that somehow survived the resets. Carved stone marker at the town center. Don't trust a delivery. Don't come to Blackwood. No one leaves. Tell my family I love them. Tell them I tried to come home. The stone remains there in that perpetual snowy night, waiting for the next driver to find it, though by then, it will already be too late.